Good morning. Oh, good morning, good morning, good morning. Oh, no, all. Oh, oh. It's a good job I've got my wellies on. You're about to hear typical squelch, squelch. It's a daisy. There we go. But yes, good morning, one and all. Welcome once again to a fantastic good morning walk here in the. Oh, I think that's a new pony and or type horse. Oh, good morning from Ireland and good morning from Helsinki. Someone Gen from Hamburg, good morning to you. Good morning, one and all. Just some brief pony action for you. How's the job going? Very well, actually, at the moment. Like I say, I'm a COVID communicator. So, in terms of sort of like in charge of like behavioral marketing, is what we sort of call it. You know, encouraging the public to, shall we say, take on sort of the awareness and sort of responsibilities they have, obviously, around COVID. Still pushing out lots of jabs, news about boosters. Again, asking people continuously, you know, please wear a mask. You know, and like I say, going into some very, very interesting meetings. And I've said this before, when this contract is up, I will very, very happily spill the beans because I'll be out of contract by then. And like I say, most of that information will be old by the time I sort of reveal it. But nevertheless, it will be a very, very interesting, because like I say, I so want to talk about some of this stuff. And again, sort of working with sort of the council and what, like, especially during this time is very interesting. But yes, good morning to you. I think it was someone from Poland there just before the chat disappeared. 27 Bike Brothers from Lubin in Poland. Just Cantwell, good morning to you. How long will the contract last? I don't know. It's up to the environmental health team. I'm meant to be getting news actually about the length of the contract, because I think they might be shifting priorities sort of away from COVID. So maybe my contract could end up being shorter. Again, we'll have to see. We'll have to see. But like I say, not being able to talk about politics, especially this week. Oh, so much I want to talk about this week. But is it a rolling contract? Potentially, it looks. Initially, they said they might extend it, obviously, because of COVID. We're just gonna have to see what happens. We're just gonna have to see. As always with these, you know, type of temporary contracts, you just have to wait and see what happens. But nevertheless, you know, I'm enjoying it. Definitely had some like new experiences under my belt and got some good experience from doing a lot of this stuff. So this is at Barnsley. No, no, it's a different borough. But it's close. But it's close. Yeah, but needless to say, it is quite fun. Yeah, but it is very enjoyable. So, history. Like, generally out of interest, how many people have actually done history to like a degree level, like out of general interest? Because I'll tell you now, I haven't. But it's something I always wish I actually had done. Initially, after I left secondary school, because I've always had sort of a love of history, I did want to go and do to college and take as my sort of subjects. I wanted to do Tudor history, archaeology, and politics, and those were the those are the subjects that I wanted to do. And then, of course, when you go to university, some universities will specialize in like their history. Like, I know someone just mentioned Hull there, but Hull is meant to be really, really good for like Middle Eastern history. So I had a friend go and do that there, and that's what sort of the history that she even did. I think she went even to do her doctorate. I think she's currently in the Netherlands, because apparently they've got a department over there that does and sort of focuses on that Middle Eastern history area, where again, just where her interest lies. And then obviously York is quite famous mostly for archaeology. Again, because there's lots of archaeological sites around there. And it depends, I think, just which university you choose, really. They all just have, different focuses. So again, if anyone is thinking about going to do a history degree, or someone who is thinking about going to do a history degree, piece of my advice would be, think about which is your favorite period of history, and then go do some research on the university and the history that they specialize in. Because you don't want to just go, well, I'll just go to this university, and then they end up only specializing in like what is known as like modern, almost like pre-modern social history. So you might only do sort of like maybe 19th century history, and you may look at it from the views of, I don't know, public health, the beginnings of that type of stuff, government at the time. If it doesn't interest you, then, make sure you, again, do your research in these types of things. It's really important, especially if you're going to spend a lot of money and 3 years. You want to make sure that that is the correct area that you want to do. Would you have studied Tudor history? Yes. I would have loved to have studied Tudor history. Would you recommend York as a place to visit? Yes. Yes, I would recommend York as a place to visit. It's very nice, especially if you want to see sort of what medieval, streets in the UK would have looked like. It is very, very good. And again, it's not very big, though. That's, I think, what sort of surprises a lot of people about the area, about it. They think it's bigger than it actually is. But again, that's because populations were a lot smaller. These sort of big cities at the time were probably around about the size of almost towns we have today. But because of, again, the population density, were almost considered a city at the time. And of course, again, historically, York was sort of the big key center point of well, of a lot of action, shall we say, in especially medieval England. So, what are we talking about today? Why history? Well, history is really important, and a lot of people will use historical events of the past without knowledge of the event itself, the events surrounding it, and of course the consequences that those events had, not only on that area, maybe the rest of like the country at the time and other people around them. Like I say, one of the if you want a really good history video, how democracy is failing and falling. Well, oh. Got a lone pony. Lone pony in the background. And well, you're back just in time, so welcome. Put your shop away, lads. Because we're talking some history. And there is and you see this a lot of when people use these historical events to, justify almost modern actions, as if it's, okay to, do these types of things. For example, the Siege of Vienna, and I'm really careful about bringing this up because there's a lot of, shall we say, extremists out there who use this like historical event and see it as essentially the clash between, at the time, what was the Christian world, even though, again, Protestant Saxony did fight in it. They sent troops to aid in the relief effort of Vienna. Again, considering, this is still sort of, just getting out of, shall we say, the religious wars, of the time. But it is seen as this, cataclysmic event, and it is seen and used by these extremists as justification, as, well, an excuse for violence. In fact, the last couple, shall we say, of extremist events, again, just being careful here, they have referred to that and used it as a justification as to their violent acts. And of course, that's probably the most, shall we say, extreme version of it. But this week we've had two very, shall we say, prominent prominent politicians, shall we say, use historical events to essentially try and justify current political gains and aims. And they are outlandishly wrong to use these in these terms. Because, first of all, Boris Johnson, who's the first up to do these, was basically saying that it was freedom of movement that caused the Roman Empire to, quote, collapse. Again, like I say, that's not what happened. Any expert from any, historical field. In fact, Mary Beard, yeah, I think I've talked about Mary Beard before. We've talked about Mary Beard before. She's come up in some videos before. Probably one of the most eminent classicists currently working in the field of sort of classical history. A couple of years ago, had a debate with Boris Johnson about who had been and who was the most influential classic period people on today's history. And I think Boris took the side of the Greeks, and Mary Beard she took the side of the Romans, and she completely, and I mean well and truly completely, wiped the floor with Boris on that. There are a couple, again, I don't know if they're still out there, there were a couple of blogs talking about obviously the points that both people brought up, and a lot of people basically saying, while Boris extolled the virtues, of course, of Athens and their democracy, he did very little to actually tie it to today's institutions and how they still carry on in our traditions. And I think the debate is still up. I think it's still up today. I think if you put in if you were to Google if you were to Google the Boris Johnson versus Mary Beard history debate, I think you'd be able to find it. So I know it's still up somewhere. And then there are lots of articles about, again, based from, historians and academics discussing the debate. And they pretty much all agree Johnson got completely wiped out. And later on, shall we say, when she was being asked to go on the stepped in and said that she shouldn't be allowed that board position, which is again very interesting at the time. Oop. Morning. Oop. Had a bit of a dog break there. But yeah, it was very, very suspicious that, shall we say, the government would ever decide to wade in and say that she shouldn't be allowed this seat. Now, of course, the board elected her, and that's where she currently sits. And she waded into this conversation as well, because again, it caused somewhat quite a stir on, if you've ever been to, what is it, the Reddit r/UK history, and r/ I believe it's classical history, there were a lot of people talking about this, because again, this is often used by a lot of people on the right to say, oh, look how mighty and powerful, you know, the Roman Empire was. And yet here it was, you know, taken down by immigration. That's essentially the line that a lot of people will use to it. But again, if you've ever studied properly, or read any books, or listened to any lectures, or watched any TV shows about the fall of Rome, you will know that it was not just quote unquote immigration. Because again, our concept of immigration that we're talking about is a very, very modern thing. So the idea of, you know, immigration as we think of it today was very, very, very different in sort of the classical era. Yeah, exactly, yeah. Rome fell for a variety of reasons, but it wasn't, immigration just wasn't one of them. Yeah, you are true, Chthonic, yeah. And of course this plays again into sort of the larger quote unquote culture wars that the right like to play. And oh, by the way, if you saw, because I can talk about foreign politics, if you are living in America very recently, you obviously saw West Virginia, a Republican recently won the governorship, and basically all he talked about was the culture wars. So unfortunately, all these things, oh dear boy. Oh dear. So one of these things that we this bird frightened me there out of nowhere. So all these things that we take into it of history, you know, they don't take into the fact that at that time, Rome was not one empire. It was technically being split into two separate entities, the Eastern Empire and the Western Empire. And you've got to understand, again, the historical split, the difference, again, of economically between the Eastern and the Western Empire. The Eastern Empire had a lot of trade, especially from the East, further away, having full access to sort of the Silk Road. The Western Empire was far, far more based on agricultural farming practices at the time. So mostly it was the growing of wine where they could grow it, olives again where they could grow it, and of course grain. And these estates were massive estates that were run and essentially owned by essentially the rich and wealthy and the well-connected of the Roman Empire. In fact, they probably controlled, essentially in the Western Empire, the elites pretty much owned, I think it was about 70% of all essentially land in the West, of the Western Empire. So they were very, very happy to keep control, of course, of the empire. And they used their immense wealth to corrupt the Senate, corrupt elections, gain favors with the emperor. And again, the emperor system, the emperor system, again, when the empire, again, historically had strong emperors, the empire was strong. When it had weak emperors, well, bad things tended to happen. And, well, they didn't, shall we say, die peacefully in their sleep. And the end of, shall we say, the Western Empire was marred with some very, very weak emperors who were never going to solve the problems. You also then have the problems of sort of the tribes. And again, from what we can tell historically from like Ice Age, core readings of the Earth at the time, we had tons and of very, very bad Ice Age winters at the time, and this caused tribes to basically upend and root, and some tribes basically turned into, well, full-fledged armies, and basically went, that tribe's got better land than we have, let's go take it. And you've got to remember, this wasn't happening, this was happening sort of beyond the Danube at the time. Again, there was no real sense of like central control. It was very a tribalistic structure that existed out beyond the empire. More ponies. We'll get some more ponies. But it just goes to show you the reality of what was happening beyond the empire, and then what actually happened within the empire, even sort of trying to reform the empire, to sort of like reform its military, to bring about some agricultural and land reform rules. to essentially give well, the poor people of Rome more access to the land, and basically, force the the elite to give up some of their land so that these people can become about so that they can live off the land and have some wealth of their own, which again would have worked. Rome grew, became so successful because when it had conquests, it would take the land that it had got and then it would give those lands pretty much to, well, the conquering hordes. And of course, what happened to the people on those lands? Well, they ended up as slaves. Let's not forget, the Roman Empire was very, very much a slave-owning state and nation. And well, even though again that concept sort of didn't exist at that time, the idea of states and nations. But that is again another factor that brought it down, because Rome had to spend, especially after the big slave revolt. Of course, we've all seen the film, aka Spartacus, and especially after that, Rome started to spend more of its budget, its economical budget, on internal defense, mainly so that they could essentially keep the slave population under control. Again, another reason why the empire fell. And again, we could obviously go into talks about all the myriad different reasons and themselves, and Rome did not fall in a day. It took hundreds of thousands it took hundreds of thousands of years. Indeed, they say, well, roughly, most historians I think agree, roughly like the fall of Rome is something like 1,000 years. And to say that it was quote unquote freedom of movement that did it couldn't be more wrong on this fact. So that was definitely, shall we say, and bear in mind, I've probably only really talked just about a few things that that there were causes, of the empire's fall. But by no means was it anything to do with, like I say, immigration. Like I say, our concept of immigration that we have today is entirely different to the way that other people, especially in like the classical world, thought about immigration. Our view of immigration is really as like a really sort of, when it comes to sort of that view. I mean, if you look at how sort of quote unquote the borders of Rome were set up, they weren't meant to stop the flow of people. They were meant to stop armies. because Rome always needed labor. Always. For all its projects, whether it be, the army, working in the shipyards, the construction areas, it needed labor. And even on agricultural land as well. Like I say, when the fact that, the elites of Rome pretty much owned the majority of land, they again were looking for labor, not just, of course, slave labor, but most of those people would be then employed almost on like a servitude track almost, to sort of work the elites' farms, and not their own sort of wealth that would have benefited them, and the greater betterment of Rome. In fact, there even is a debate, and again, this is how sort of impressive the bureaucracy really was, of course, of the the Roman Republic. Not just the Republic, but all of Rome itself, even the, of course, Western Empire as well. There is recordings of a debate in the Senate about the giving of citizenship to people who come into this land, and honestly, it's kind of interesting because you can see the exact same debates play out and exactly happen. Play out in the Senate of one side of the elite didn't want to give and continuing to give out citizenship because, again, if you weren't a Roman citizen, well, then they could sort of exploit you more. Whereas the other side, again, the reformers, and again, this was taking place again during sort of the fall of the Roman Empire. And the other side was saying, hey, these people deserve citizenship. Many of them have, served in the army, which is again a promise that we, as senators, said we would, give them if they had served. So, it was, even back in the day, the idea of, citizenship, still, again, very hotly debated topic. But again, to say that it was sort of free movement of people that caused the fall of the Roman Empire is completely wrong. Of course, the next idea, and the next, shall we say, challenger. Oh, now we've got a bit of wind. The next challenger up to the debate was, of course, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who, as you probably have heard, we've been having, shall we say, a bit of a barney with the French about fishing. To which I would say that if this British fishing boat, quote unquote, did have a license to fish in French waters, why haven't they shown it? And yet they've paid the indemnity to the French. Interesting, that. Just something for you to think about, and why sort of, shall we say, certain newspapers haven't asked that question. But Jacob Rees-Mogg came up and said, these, what is it, the crusty French, always get a bit angry around October because it's, quote, the anniversaries of Agincourt and Trafalgar. Of course, these are, quote unquote, two celebrated victories over the French. And yet, as I have said this before, one of the big myths that got spread around very, very quickly, especially really in the last sort of 20 years ago, is the idea that the French are sort of, the surrenderers. The French don't fight, that they are cowards. And yet, if you really look at the history, of like the French and sort of the military, they've had far more successes than we've had, in the world, especially when it comes to fighting. Historically, they've fought everyone. They fought the British, they fought the Dutch, they fought, at the time, the Holy Roman Empire, they fought the Austrians, they fought the Spanish, they fought the Moroccans, they fought the Algerians, they fought again, they had an empire, they fought around the world just like, we did. And especially in like the 16th century, where like the French and the Spanish were literally going at each other, hammer and tongs, like almost in a period of like non-stop warfare, almost similar to the 100 Years' War, by the way. The French again tended to come out on top. And again, it's Jacob Rees-Mogg just trying to use, again, history as some sort of gamesmanship and one-upmanship. And yet, let's really have a look at those two battles in particular. Agincourt, while it was a victory, was by no means the defining factor of the war, because again, the UK and France in a couple of years' time were back to war with each other. Again, the story of the 100 Years' War is pretty much, the British win, the French win, the British win, the French win, and ultimately the French win. Essentially. So, congratulations, you managed to pick one battle out of probably the hundreds that took place during the 100 Years' War, where we had, a significant victory. Congratulations. And then, of course, you have Trafalgar. Again, pretty much the one thing that sort of cements the idea that, it was Britain that, quote unquote, ruled the waves. And at the time, that's what happened. Strategically, what had happened is that the Spanish fleet at the time, again under the control of Napoleon's brother, combined with the French fleet, and basically, well, it got wrecked. There's no two ways to say that. And for a long time, this rendered two of the British's main competitors completely, out of the battle. Now, yes, Trafalgar is again a good example of, ship of the line combat, uru rah. But again, people forget, just like after World War II, where America sort of became the dominant domestic power, was because domestically it hadn't been touched in a way that, again, its former rivals prior to World War II Britain, France, Germany, the USSR had all been hit. You know, they were the only country in the world that hadn't taken, you know, those economic hits. So, of course, they're going to survive. And again, same for Trafalgar. If you've just taken out sort of your main two naval competitors at that time, what's going to happen? You know, you're going to find that you are in a position of dominance. Congratulations. And by the way, historically, when it comes to quote-unquote Cod Wars, it's well worth pointing out that Britain has lost every single Cod War it has ever been involved in. And bear in mind, there have been, quote, 3 Cod Wars, and we've lost them every single time. And of course, one was when we were outside the European Union, and the other 2 were when we were inside the European Union. So there is no difference now to expect that we will not lose the same thing. And of course, by the way, Joe Biden, news from America, decided that he would lift the Trump sanctions on the European Union. So Europe has lifted these sanctions, but of course, we're not in the European Union, meaning those Trump sanctions that really hurt us are now, well, still on us. So, I hope you've sort of enjoyed this history walk, talking about, you know, history. I do like to babble on about history. I do find it very interesting. Well, we did see a couple of ponies today. I'd like to say, I did hope you enjoyed seeing them when they were there. But as always, like I say, thank you very much for watching. Do have an absolutely, you know, fantastic weekend. Go out, enjoy yourselves, wear your mask. If you are in the over 50s age group, especially in the UK, go get your booster. You can go book it now via the NHS on your apps if you've got your app. There are walk-in centres you can go to. You know, slipping into my COVID communications job. And yes, check out Timothy Snyder's channel on YouTube if you want more history stuff. Extra credits or extra history, as they brand it under, do some very good history videos. So if you want to learn, for example, about the South Seas bubble, which, by the way, we are still paying for, a debt that goes all the way back to like the 1600s. They did a fantastic series about it and explaining what it was and what happened around it. It's very interesting because, again, Rishi Sunak mentioned it in the budget not too long ago. Again, historical precedents. Interesting as to why are we paying off this thing called the I think it's what is it, the SSB, which is again the South Seas bubble. Go watch it. Very fascinating history series that still has economic implications today on the current UK. So thank you for once again for watching. As always, been an absolutely fantastic walk. Please do it again. Come join me next Saturday where we'll be talking about something. I don't know. Who knows? But as always, thank you very much as always for watching, and we'll see you all next time.